Have you ever found yourself in one of those crazy crowded plazas, just trying to navigate through all the people to find a place to sit down?
Oh, absolutely.
We all been there, right? Desperately searching for an empty bench.
Yeah.
But I was recently looking at this study, and it made me realize that there's actually a lot more to how we use those spaces than you might initially think.
It's true. We don't always think about it consciously, but there's this sort of unspoken dance between human behavior and design, especially in those kinds of public settings.
Yeah, it's like our behavior is influenced by the design without us even realizing it. And this study, which I found in the Journal of Asian Architecture and Building Engineering, dives into that exact idea. It's titled Rest Facilities at Commercial Plazas Through a User Behavior Perspective.
Yeah.
Basically, they did these really detailed observations in 3 different plazas in Taiwan.
Interesting. What kind of observations did they do?
Well, they didn't just ask people about their seating preferences or anything like that.
Okay.
They went full on detective mode.
Oh, wow.
Seriously, they would track who sat where, how long they stayed there, even what they were doing while they rested.
So they were really trying to get a sense of the nuances of how people were actually using the space, not just how we assume they might.
Exactly. And what they found was actually kind of surprising.
I bet. So what did they find? Spill the tea?
Well, one of the things that stood out to me was that people weren't always using the seating that was provided for them.
Really? You mean they weren't just parking themselves on the benches?
Not always, no. They found a lot of what they call supplementary rest facilities.
Supplementary rest facilities. Okay. I'm intrigued. What does that even mean?
So think stairs, railings, low walls, basically anything that could support a person looking for a quick break.
So people were getting creative. I like it.
They were. And it makes you wonder, why choose those spots? I mean, why not just go for a bench like a normal person?
Right. There has to be something more to it than that.
And there is. The study suggests that people are drawn to those less conventional spots for specific reasons, and it often comes down to how they want to engage with the plaza itself.
Interesting. So it's not just about finding any old place to rest. It's about finding the right place.
Exactly. Imagine a plaza with an amazing view. People might naturally gravitate towards a railing or a set of steps that gives them that perfect vantage point.
That makes sense. I've definitely done that before, perched on a staircase to get a better look at something.
Right. And speaking of getting a good view, this study also found this really interesting connection between events happening in the plazas and the use of those supplementary seating options.
Oh, really? When there are events going on, people are more likely to get creative with their seating choices.
Exactly. It seems like we instinctively adapt to our surroundings, even in a crowd.
So it's like we're hardwired for that ingenuity,
Huh.
We find a way to make it work, even if it means sitting on a railing to catch a performance.
I love that. And they actually found a great example of this in one of the plazas they observed, Tiger City Plaza, I think it was called.
Tiger City Plaza, okay.
Yeah. During events, people would flock to the stairs and railings to get a better view. Basically, turning these architectural elements into these impromptu seating areas.
So they weren't even intended to be seating, but people were like, perfect, a great view.
Exactly. It's like that saying, one man's trash is another man's treasure. But in this case, it's more like one architect's railing is another person's front row seat.
And honestly, I kind of love that. It speaks to this kind of human resilience, We're adaptable. We find a way to engage with the space, even if it means thinking outside the bench, so to speak.
I love that, thinking outside the bench. But it makes you wonder, how often do we as designers miss those opportunities? We're so focused on how we think a space should be used that we don't always account for how people will actually use it.
It's true. We can get so caught up in our own ideas that we forget to really observe and learn from how people naturally interact with the world around them.
It's like we get so stuck in our own heads that we forget to look around and see what's actually happening.
Exactly. And that can lead to some, let's say missed opportunities when it comes to design.
You're telling me. And it's not always about these grand gestures either. Sometimes it's the simplest things that can make the biggest difference.
Absolutely. Take something as basic as shade.
Shade.
Yeah, shade. That glorious absence of direct sunlight. Turns out it plays a huge role in how people choose to rest in a plaza.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, who wants to bake in the sun when they're trying to relax?
Right. And the study actually found that shade was the second most important factor in determining where people chose to rest.
Really? Second only to
Being near a landmark. Which makes sense too, right? People want to be where the action is.
Yeah, I guess we're all drawn to those points of interest. But it's funny how we don't always consciously register those things. I can't tell you how many times I've grabbed a bench with a killer view only to realize 5 minutes later that I'm slowly turning into a human popsicle.
Uh-huh. Yeah, we've all been there. It's like, oh, this bench is perfect. Wait a minute, where's the SPF?
Exactly. And you know what's even funnier? You start looking around and you realize that all the smart people are huddled under that one little tree in the corner.
Every time. And they're all packed in there like sardines, but hey, at least they're not getting sunburned. It's like those shaded spots become prime real estate in a plaza.
Totally. You can practically see people marking their territory under those trees. Haha.
Yeah.
But on a more serious note, it does make you think about how crucial it is for designers to really consider the impact of shade, especially in places with really intense climates, you know?
Absolutely. And again, it comes back to that idea of flexibility and choice. Instead of just scattering a few benches around a plaza and calling it good, why not design those spaces with shade in mind from the get-go?
Ooh, I like where you're going with this. Give me some examples.
Well, imagine like pergolas covered in beautiful climbing vines, or these strategically placed trees that provide dappled shade throughout the plaza. You could even have innovative shade structures that double as art installations.
Okay, now you're just showing off, but
Yeah.
I love it. It's like we can take this functional element shade and turn it into a design feature in its own right.
Precisely. And by integrating shade in a thoughtful way, you're not just making the space more comfortable, you're actually encouraging people to use it in different ways.
It's like we're subtly guiding people's behavior without them even realizing it.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of good design, isn't it? It works in harmony with human behavior to create these seamless and enjoyable experiences.
It's all about creating this sense of flow, this natural rhythm between the built environment and the people who inhabit it. And speaking of people, I was really interested to see that the study also looked at how a specific group interacts with Plaza's children.
Oh, yeah. That's a great point. Kids experience these spaces in a totally different way than adults do.
They do. And it's something that, honestly, I don't think we always consider enough when we're designing these public spaces.
It's true. And it's not just about making things colorful and adding a playground, although those are great too. It's about understanding the unique needs and perspectives of children and designing with those in mind.
So what did they find in this study? Were there any surprises when it came to kids in plazas?
Well, one thing that stood out was the issue of bench height. Apparently, standard bench heights aren't always ideal for kids.
Oh, right, because they have those adorable little legs that don't quite reach the ground yet.
Exactly. And it's not just about comfort either. When kids don't have appropriate places to sit, it can actually impact their ability to engage with the space and socialize with their peers. Imagine like a group of kids trying to have a conversation when their feet are dangling a foot off the ground.
It's like the grown-up world wasn't quite designed with them in mind, which I guess is kind of obvious, but still. So what's the solution? Should we start installing miniature benches everywhere, like tiny little benches just for kids?
That's one approach, I guess. But I think it's about being more creative than that. Instead of just shrinking down adult furniture, what if we rethought the whole concept of seating for kids?
I'm listening.
Imagine, instead of just having one standard bench height, you have a variety of options. Lower benches for kids, benches with adjustable heights, even some playful seating options like low walls or gently sloping surfaces that double as both seating and play areas.
Okay, I have to admit, that's a much cooler solution than just miniature benches. It's about creating a more playful and dynamic environment that actually encourages kids to interact with the space on their own terms.
Exactly. And when you do that, you're not just creating a more child-friendly space, you're creating a more inclusive and welcoming space for everyone.
It's amazing how even something as simple as the height of a bench can have such a big impact on how kids experience a space.
It's true, we don't always think about it, but good design often goes unnoticed, precisely because it just, works. We don't really notice the choices that were made to create a positive experience, but we definitely notice when things feel off.
It's like that saying, you don't know what you got till it's gone. Or in this case, you don't notice good design until it's bad design.
Exactly. And when it comes to designing public spaces, I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind. It's not just about throwing in a few benches and some trees and hoping for the best.
Right. It's more nuanced than that.
Much more. It's about understanding how all these elements work together, how they interact to create this kind of cohesive and engaging whole.
I like that. It's like we're composing a symphony, but instead of notes, we're using benches and trees and shade.
Exactly, a symphony of design. And every element has its role to play.
Speaking of elements playing a role, the study also talked about how the placement of certain things can impact people's behavior.
Right, like how people tend to gravitate towards benches that offer the best views, or how the placement of a trash can subtly influence people's movements.
It's like we're all just subconsciously following these invisible design cues.
In a way, yes. And as designers, the more we understand those cues, the more effectively we can create spaces that feel intuitive and enjoyable to use.
So it all comes back to observation, doesn't it? Really paying attention to how people are actually using these spaces.
Absolutely. It's about being observant, being curious, and being willing to learn from the way people naturally interact with the world around them.
It's like channeling our inner urban planner every time we step into a public space.
Exactly. And, you might be surprised at what you start to notice when you begin to look at these spaces through that lens.
It's like a whole new world opens up. Well, I have to say, this deep dive has been a fascinating journey. We've covered so much ground, from the importance of shade to the surprisingly complex world of bench design.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore when it comes to design and its impact on our lives.
That's the beauty of it, isn't it? There's always something new to discover. But for now, we'll leave you with this thought. The next time you find yourself in a public space, take a moment to really see it. Not just the benches and the trees, but the choices that were made to shape that space and how those choices make you feel. And who knows, you might just find yourself inspired to create a little design magic of your own.